Right. In this demonstration, we're going to talk about how you can get started using Premiere for your project. So let's first look at our folder that's on the desktop. We have a project folder that we've been building with audio, images, video clips, and I also created another folder called Working Files, and that's where I stored my Audacity files. And because those are not things that you can directly import into another program, but you can create exported audio files like these audio files here with Audacity. But I would like to keep my original files with my project, so I keep a folder called Working Files. And then I also created something called Premiere Pro Files, which is currently empty, and that's where we're going to save our first Premiere Pro project. But let's take a quick peek. If you look into audio, these are all the audio files that I've collected for this example, and you should have arranged your stuff in a very similar way. You'll also notice that I have a little folder called subclips. You don't have to have this, but sometimes I like to have little subclip folders inside of audio and video in the event that I edit a larger clip, for instance, like this one that is called Rainscope. This is the full song, Rainscope Down, and the subclip is called Leggy Edited. Leggy is the name of the band. I could actually, just to be really clear here, I could say Rainscope Edited. And then that way I know that it's a shorter clip of the Rainscope song. Okay, and if you go into video, you'll see that these are the videos that I've pulled up. Okay. So let's get started, and it's really good if you have all of this organized in your Finder or Explorer first, and you'll see why when we go into Premiere. Okay, so open Premiere Pro, and then if you've never opened it before, it'll offer you something that says, to start a new project if you've never opened it for the first time. But if you have before, then you're going to get this screen where it says New Project. You can either click here, or you can also go up to File, New, and then choose Project. Okay, so we're going to say New Project, and then this is the screen that you'll see. I'm going to go ahead and give it a file name, and we'll call it Project 1. Okay, and then it asks you where you want to save it. Most likely where you are telling it to save it, or whenever you see this, it's going to tell you to save it like in some user Premiere folder. So you definitely want to change this and make sure you're saving it to the right place. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose the Mat 120 Project 1 folder that I have, and I'm going to choose Working Files and put it in Premiere Pro Files. Okay, so that's where it's going to save now. And then I would leave everything else the same. If you want to understand what this is, the OpenCL, it's based on my graphics card, and you may or may not see this depending on the computer you're working on. You might also see another option that's an accelerated graphics card choice. If you don't have any of those, then you are going to want to choose Mercury Playback Engine software only. What that does is it uses only your CPU and RAM to do the rendering. Okay, and everything else you can leave alone. And then I want to show you the Scratch Discs section. Scratch Discs is a tab that allows you to select where you want to put your captured audio, video, things like that. And the reason for that is that video really sucks up a lot of space, and it hogs a lot of resources. And there's some different reasons that having a separate disk for your video rendering is good if you have gigantic projects. Ours isn't that big, so it's really not a big deal. But if you if you have a hard drive that's very, very full of stuff, then it's ideal if you can designate a remote separate hard drive that you can read and write your files to, because it'll work more efficiently. But we're going to leave this as is for now. Okay, I'm going to say OK, and then it opens up this new project file setup. Okay, so the way that this works is, and I'm going to open this all the way. The way that this works is that we have these four basic bins that are set up, or excuse me, panels. And the bottom left one is the project panel. Okay, and then if you go up above, this is by standard default your source clip panel, and it has some other things here too, which we'll get to, but right now it should be set on your source clips. And then also down in the bottom right is your timeline, and then in the top right is going to be the place where you have all your composited stuff that's going to be ready for output. Basically, this window is going to read whatever has been composited in the timeline. All right, the source monitor you'll see is different from this one. The source monitor is going to show you what is down here selected in the clip, so that whenever you select something and then you can choose to play it, or you can also choose in and out points whenever you're trying to edit where things are going to start and stop before you drag them into the timeline. Okay, so real quickly, one of the things that's really important before we start importing stuff is that you can use keyboard shortcuts to navigate really quickly between these different panels. So the bottom left is going to be Shift 1, the top left is going to be Shift 2, and that's the source monitor, and then Shift 3 is the timeline, and Shift 4 is going to be for the output area, okay, so that you can preview your output. All right, so let's get started by going up here and going to File, and we're going to import. Now, you can import, let's go here. You can import entire projects, and this is why it's so nice to be organized in the beginning, so that you've got your project folder organized with your audio, images, video, and so forth, all right, clips in folders and subdirectories. Okay, so I'm just going to take this whole folder and I'm going to import it. Now, one of the things I want you to notice is that we have this working files folder that has all these Audacity files. Well, Premiere's not going to know what to do with those Audacity files, and nor is it going to be able to import itself. So it's going to give us an error, but you can just bypass the error, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to say import, and then it is going to give me this option where it asks, do you want to import the entire site or just selected sequences? You could choose selected sequences, but you're going to have to go through and select them. I would just do the entire site and then go ahead and click OK. And then you see here it tells me that there's a file import failure. It didn't fail on everything, it only failed on the Audacity files, and it didn't bring in the Premiere file because the Premiere file is itself. So if I click on OK, then you'll see down here in the bottom left pane in our project pane, this is where it pulls in our assets. Now what you might see is this toggled view for the first time, which is sort of a thumbnail view. But if you want to go down here to list view, I recommend that because it's easier to see. If you do toggle view and then you try to go inside, it's going to open a new window. So that's why it's kind of nice to do list view, and then you can just twirl this down and you can twirl these open and see what your assets are right there, okay, which is pretty nice. All right, so I also want to show you how whenever you've got this project panel selected over on the left, how you can get a better view of your assets. So what you can do is you can hold down the Shift key and the tilde key. The tilde key is going to be right above the Tab key on your keyboard. All right, and so what it does is it goes to full screen, and just so you know, I'm going to get out of that by doing Shift tilde again, and anytime you're in any single one of these panels, doing Shift tilde will take it into full screen, okay? And if you kind of lose track and you start clicking around on some of these things, you know, you can always go back to the basic editing interface, which is up here in the highlighted in blue. Anyway, so I'm going to go back down here and I'm going to choose the project pane or project panel. I'm going to do Shift tilde, and it shows me full screen. And what I can do is twirl these things down, and if they're not already open, and I can take a look here and see what the different pieces of information are about my different assets. And you'll see that there are all of the names of the files. And one of the things you'll maybe notice immediately is that I originally had a subdirectory in my real files for this edited file as an edited clip, and in the settings when I imported it, I could have selected to import with subdirectories, but I chose not to, and so it just dropped the contents of that subdirectory into the main audio directory, so in case that's confusing to you. But one of the things that you'll notice here is that it has the frame rate of movies, right? And under frame rate for audio, it's going to have basically the sampling rate listed. And so that you can see where things might be inconsistent. For instance, this radar scanner is a different sampling rate than these other ones. But you'll see for video that we have some slightly different frame rates. Like the flower has a slower frame rate of 24 frames per second. The slides.mov is 30 frames per second. The other ones are 29.97, which is very close to 30, so that's not that big of a deal. And what you're going to have to sort of deal with is that if you have some assets that are different speeds, like different FPS, then you're probably going to want to choose the most common, the standard one that you want, so that other things will conform to it. And this isn't going to be that big of a deal. Whenever I pull in the flower time lapsed video into the timeline later, it will match whatever it is that I have chosen first. So if I first put something into the timeline like slides.mov, then it will automatically take all of the resolution settings and all of the metadata settings for that particular movie, and it will apply it to the entire project. Now that's a really important thing to understand. So if I were to put slides.mov into my timeline first, then the movie would be set up so that it's 30 FPS. And if you look down here, further down to the right, you'll see that it also has, under video info, it has the actual pixel dimensions, the resolution of 1920 by 1080. So that means that it's 1080p for its HD resolution. And that's actually very important, and you can actually sort of scoot that over if you need to see what this 1.0 is, and that's going to be the square pixel dimension. And if you wanted to look at this other information, like it's compressed mono, and but anyway, the sampling rate is what is important. So this is kind of an important thing to pay attention to. The other thing that you want to remember is that when you bring mono tracks into Premiere Pro, then what's going to happen is that if you just play it back out of your speakers later, you're going to end up hearing probably something that sounds okay. But if you put headphones on a mono track, it's going to only come out of one side, most likely the left side of your headset. And that can be really jarring a lot of times. So later we'll talk about how you can get your mono stuff into stereo tracks, but it's okay for right now if you just pull something in that's mono, especially because under slides.mov we're not actually going to use the audio track that comes with it anyway, so it's not a big deal. But I just want to show you how you can intentionally set your resolution from the very beginning. There are two different ways to do it. One is that you can look at all this information and you can say, okay, well, for sure I want this to be 1920 by 1080. So you look at this resolution and then you go, okay, well, my frames per second are also fine. And then you can choose this and you can drag it down to this little page icon right here. All right, and then what it does is it automatically will drop that into the sequence for you. All right, and into the timeline, and it creates a sequence up here for you. All right, and this is called slides because it's taking the name of the movie. It's taking the slides.mov and it's just making the name of the sequence. All right, so that's one way of doing it. And now for the entire document, that resolution is set up. The reason that's important is that if you just come over here and you just take any random picture that has any old resolution and you drag that into the timeline and it's the very first thing you drop in the timeline, that is going to set up the resolution for your video. And that can actually be really problematic if it doesn't match anything else that you're doing. And that is really confusing to a lot of students if they drop stuff in at the wrong, resolution for the first thing that they stick in their timeline. So make sure you're aware of that. And then you'll notice if I scroll down, you see that here now I've got this little timeline icon where it says slides. That is the instance of this particular sequence, okay? And you see that this is the name of the sequence. You can have multiple sequences up here, just so you know, and you can export movies out of different sequences. And that's what you would do for a really big project where you're having to stitch things together in different scenes and things like that. But for what we're doing, you're probably just going to want to have one sequence. Now, I'm going to go ahead and undo that just so you can kind of see, all right, that now that instance goes away and we have no sequence over here in the timeline. And if I just come back over here to this project panel and I do Shift tilde again, you see that slides thing is not there either, all right, because this is just an exploded view of this little view, okay? And if I were to open this up, you would see that it's also an exploded view. It's actually, all that information is actually there. All right, so, but if we come back up here, I just want to reiterate one more time that what we've got is, here we have the actual assets, but if I were to take one of these and drag it over to this little page icon, that would mean that while I'm looking at all the information that's in front of me, I am intentionally setting up my sequence with the same, with the correct resolution and whatever the frames per second is. Now you can also set up, like if I had images, still images here, I could take just a placeholder with a resolution of 1920 by 1080 or by, something like 1280 by 720. And I could drop that into the timeline as well, and it would just set up the physical dimensions. It wouldn't set up the frames per second. It would just set up the actual physical resolution. So anyway, I just want to point that out to you. Now, the other way that you can do what I just described, instead of having to come here and then drag it in to create a new item or new sequence item, is that you can literally just come over here, and you can just drag it directly into the timeline. That's another option. You could also take this and stick it up here in the source monitor first. So there's some different ways that you can actually do that. So now that we have a basic understanding of that, what we can do is we can select something. Like, let's first of all go ahead and say that we're going to select something in our video panel. So let's twirl this closed for audio, and then we're going to select slides. And also I want you to notice here on the different videos, you'll notice that these videos don't have like a little green icon, and the little green icon on top of this one called slides.mov it's a little picture of a waveform. That means that it has audio attached to it. These other ones do not have audio. All right, I saved them without audio. So the slides MOV does have audio. If I select this, okay, and then I can drag it up into the preview monitor, now I can go ahead and hit play, okay, and you can see that this has sound attached to it, right? Okay, so if I wanted to select in and out points, I could do that here. I could drag something, and then I could just use my I key, and I could use to maybe select my out point. I could go over here and choose my O key. And then that, if I dragged this down into the window for the timeline, it would add it to the timeline for me, specifically with this in and out point set. I'm going to undo that though, because I don't want to set the in and out there. I just want to go ahead and drag it into the timeline, and then I'll show you another way that you can also work with it. Okay, so the first thing I want you to notice is what it did. It put it in the V1 channel, okay, and it put it in the A1 channel. Because this video clip has video and the thing below it is the audio in the timeline, then it automatically drags both in. If you ever want to separate the audio, to remove it or to mute it, then what you can do is right-click the audio, and then you can come down and say, let's see, where is it? Unlink. Okay, and then you can select it again and just hit delete so that you don't have that audio channel in there if you don't want the audio channel. I'm not going to use that audio channel, so I'm just going to delete it. Okay, but if you want it, you can keep it, and you can also modify the audio separately, like if you want to turn the volume down. The other thing that you could do, if I undo that, is that you can also click M for mute, okay, so that you can see what it sounds like whenever you play without it. All right, but there's no need to keep the extra audio if you're not going to use it, because it's just an extra sound channel that it's going to use. All right, so the next thing that I could do, and you see how long the timeline is, I'm just going to leave it there. I'll bring this clip in. You can also shorten it like that really easily. Okay, and then it stops playing. All right, so that's one of the things that you can do really easily, and then I pull it all the way back out. It goes all the way to the edge of my clip. The other thing that's kind of nice is that if you wanted to be able to snap to the end of a clip with your playback head, that's what this is, and it's just called scrubbing the timeline. I'm scrubbing the timeline with the playback head right now. But you see how it's kind of hard for me to find the exact end? Well, one of the things that I can do is while I'm dragging this playback head, I can hold down the shift key and it'll snap to the end. And you saw how it kind of got these two little white triangles at the end whenever I did that. See? It snaps to the end or to the beginning. I can also do the same thing for the beginning by holding down shift, which is really, really helpful. All right. Now the other thing that you can do too, by the way, is if you use the up and down arrow keys, if I go up, it goes to the beginning of the clip. If I use the down arrow key, it goes to the end of the clip, which is extremely helpful. Another really useful thing that you're going to find on navigating the interface is down here, you'll see that I can expand by pulling that in to the left. I can expand the interface so that I can see something in much greater detail. All right. And then I can also pull it to the left and it shrinks the interface for the timeline so that I can see something in a larger view. Okay, that's really helpful. Another thing too is that you'll notice that the top set of clips are for video. You see V1, V2, V3, and the bottom set are for audio tracks, A1, A2, A3, and A4, etc. You can easily add extra tracks by right-clicking over here in the V area, and you just say add track, and it'll add a video track. Same is true down here in the audio. When you want to add an extra audio track, you right-click and you say add track, and it'll do so. And then you can just add stuff to the new tracks. So you'll also notice that right here in the center is this, you see I'm getting my adjustment tool, all right? So I can drag to show more of the audio or more of the video area, okay? So that's really helpful. And you'll also notice that you have this tool where you can drag this up and down to see a thumbnail inside of here if you want to be able to see what the actual video is. Now that's helpful, except that it takes up a lot of the timeline once you start putting a lot of stuff in there. So I typically keep it like this until I need more detail later. And then of course the audio, I don't have anything in there, but it would start to show the waveform when I drag something in. All right, so that's the next thing that I'll do is I'll drag in audio. So go ahead and move on to the next video and then we'll start talking about that.